Okay, it's week 17. If you've made it to your fantasy championship or semis, it's probably because you had at least a player or two go off for a huge game. We call those players booms. Who's going to do it this week? Before you get those winning picks in your fantasy lineup, don't forget your winning picks for Underdog. And here's a good one to start with. If you're new to Underdog, it's Tua Tagovailoa just getting 1 yard. That's a free pick for you, and you get that if you're new. Signing up for the first time on Underdog, make sure though that you use code ENDGAME when you sign up because it gets you that free pick. It also gets you up to $1,000 of bonus cash on your first deposit. So try Underdog now and use code ENDGAME when you check out. All right, here it is, do or die time for a lot of you in week 17. So Chris, who's one player you're going to ride or die with?
This week, I am back in on Breece Hall against Buffalo. You look last week, it seems like he once again took over this backfield. He played 53 snaps. Braylon Allen, Isaiah Davis, they only played 10 snaps each. It looked like it was Breece Hall's backfield once again. And the Buffalo run defense doesn't scare me whatsoever. They're allowing the 8th most fantasy points to running backs. But more importantly for Breece Hall, where I think he's really going to shine this week, they're allowing the 2nd most receptions to running backs and the most receiving yards to running backs. We know Breece Hall is a great pass catching back, and we know the Jets like to throw the ball a lot, and they're probably going to need to throw the ball a lot in this game. So I think Breece Hall, while he may not have a huge rushing output, I think he's going to have a huge output in the receiving game. And even last week, Ramondre Stevenson, albeit, if you take out the fumbles that he can't stop, fumbling, he had a nice game on the ground against him, scored a touchdown. Why can't Breece Hall do even better? I know Breece Hall's mostly been bad this year, and especially down the stretch, but if somehow it's week 17 and you got Breece Hall, I think this is a week you need to fire him up. I think we're going to see one of his best weeks of the season this week.
Well, that's exactly how I feel about Aaron Jones. And look, I'm not just going with the narrative here, although, revenge games are always nice. This is part 2. He's already faced his former team of the Packers. He's going to do it again. And as great as the Packers were at shutting down the Saints offense on Monday night, come on. Let's just ignore that. The Packers really aren't a shutdown run defense. In fact, surprisingly, they're in the bottom half against running backs here. The last time Jones faced the Packers, way back in the early part of the season, he ran for 93 yards, also had 4 catches for 46 yards. That's 17 PPR points without even getting a touchdown. But the other thing is, just like you mentioned with Breece Hall, Jones has taken back control of this backfield. I know some people were worried the week before Cam Akers got a few carries, scored a touchdown. That's just because it was a blowout. Look, it's going to be a close, competitive game between these teams, the Vikings and the Packers. This past week, in a close, competitive game against the Seahawks, Aaron Jones had 54 snaps. Cam Akers was barely even on the field. Here's the other thing, and I always feel a little bit better about Jones this time of year. I couldn't put my finger on why I feel like he's due for a big game, and I went back and I dug in the numbers, and this is why. He just does better at the end of the season. In fact, for his career, which this is a long 8-year career in the NFL, it's long for a running back, he is just a lot better in December. He averages 5.38 yards per carry in the month of December. You might remember some of his late season heroics with the Packers. When he is healthy, he's an explosive back. He just does better at this time of the year, and I think he's going to have a big game here. Now, as we try to help you take home your fantasy championship, don't forget to help us with a like and subscribe if you haven't yet. All right, Chris, you got another running back who could become a potential league winner this week?
I think Bucky Irving is going to carry teams to fantasy championships this week. He has been great since the team's bye. You look at the game since the bye, excluding that game where he left very early in the first quarter, he has had at least 92 total yards in every single one of those games, and he scored 3 touchdowns. That's a touchdown in all but one of those games. And now he gets the best possible matchup this week against the Carolina Panthers. We just saw James Conner put up one of the best running back weeks against this defense in only one half of football. James Conner basically only played for one half and still dominated in fantasy. Why can't Bucky Irving do the same? The Panthers are so bad. They are now allowing 5.1 yards per carry. That is so bad. That is the only defense that's even allowing over 5 yards per carry. They're allowing 141 rushing yards per game. The next closest is only at 117 rushing yards per game. Bucky Irving has been good all year long. One of the best real-life running backs. He can break tackles. He can find the end zone. He can catch passes. He can do it all. And in this game, I think he's going to. And if you've got Bucky Irving, I think he's going to be one of the biggest reasons why you take home the championship this week if you do. And I also love his line on Underdog right now. 72.5 rushing yards against this defense. Yeah, I think he can smash that. I am absolutely taking the higher on that. You take that pick, you pair it with that Tua new customer special. That's an easy win right out of the gate. Just make sure you join using promo code ENDGAME to get that new customer special, plus up to $1,000 in bonus cash.
All right, now let's turn to some wide receivers. Ladd McConkey is another player who's been solid lately, but hasn't had really a big game recently. I think he does finally in week 17. It's going against the Patriots. And look, the Patriots obviously are not a great team. It's a decent pass defense. Like, they're not shutting down receivers, but they also don't give up a ton of big games to wide receivers. But I think they finally will, because this is a perfect schematic matchup for McConkey. So we know that Ladd cooks man coverage. He's the 9th best among all wide receivers in terms of fantasy points per route against man coverage, and that's according to Fantasy Points data. And the Patriots run man coverage at 42.6% of the time, one of the highest rates in the league. This is a great spot for him. And I'll tell you what, this is two teams going in opposite directions. The Patriots are just kind of playing out the season. The Chargers are fighting, right, for their playoff, not only life to stay in the wild card race, but also for positioning. And they're going to probably have to go through the passing game a lot. This running game has not been very efficient lately. And I know J.K. Dobbins maybe returns this week. It's possible. Even so, how many touches are they going to give him his first week back from injury? And this offense really hasn't been great running the ball in general. I think they're going to go to their go-to guy in Ladd McConkey, because he's going to be open a whole lot in this matchup. And as a guy who lines up in the slot a lot, he doesn't get their best opposing corner in Christian Gonzalez too much. So not worried about that. I think Ladd finally comes through with a big game for fantasy. Now, you got another wide receiver who you think is also due for another big game?
I do. I think Courtland Sutton is ready to bounce back after a lackluster, I guess, week 16. He didn't kill you, but he certainly didn't help you. But I think this week he can definitely help you, because it's the Cincinnati Bengals. Now, you look at the Bengals recently and you think, wow, they haven't really been giving up a lot to wide receivers. But let's look at who they played. They played against Cooper Rush. Now, granted, CeeDee Lamb, but still Cooper Rush. The combination of Will Levis and Mason Rudolph. And then, of course, last week, Dorian Thompson-Robinson. Those are not really offenses that scream heavy volume, good passing attacks. Now, I know the Denver Broncos aren't one of the best, most elite passing attacks, but Bo Nix has been good. Courtland Sutton has been great, and I still don't believe that this Bengals defense is any good. I think they can definitely take advantage of it here. You look at it prior to last week, he had 8 or more targets in 7 straight games and 9 or more targets in 6 of those games. I think we see that Courtland Sutton again. A guy who's going to get 8, 9, 10 targets in this game, always has big play upside, always has touchdown upside, and there is a chance that the Bengals, despite this being a tough matchup for them against the Broncos, turn this game into a shootout and force the Broncos to throw more than they want. So I think Courtland Sutton, he might have let you down last week, but I think he bounces back big this week. Don't give up on him. Keep him in your lineup.
Well, I think you might need a little bit more faith to roll out Jauan Jennings in your lineup this week. I've got it because I think we have to acknowledge the fact that it's not his fault that the production hasn't been there lately. This offense has become a mess. They've had some tough matchups. I'm giving Jennings a pass. But first of all, he's not that far off from a big game. Had 90 yards and 2 touchdowns just a couple of weeks ago. But then there's that Thursday night game against the Rams where nobody did anything whatsoever. The rain was part of it. I don't even know what the situation was, but that was just a dud on all parts. And then last week against the Dolphins, and yeah, he didn't really help your fantasy team a whole lot. But again, the Dolphins, statistically the best, the toughest against wide receivers. They allow the fewest fantasy points per game to wide receivers. And now it's going to be the polar opposite, as the 49ers are going to get the Lions, and it's a home game. The Lions have now become the 3rd worst in terms of fantasy points allowed to wide receivers. And we know this defense just continues to get worse as the season goes on, as the injuries pile up, and the Lions are just getting into shootouts every single week. Detroit is not only a great matchup for Jennings in terms of being generous to wide receivers, it's another great matchup for Jennings in particular. Detroit also runs man at a high rate. In fact, the highest rate, 46.6% of the time, and Jauan Jennings is one of the best receivers against man coverage. I think that the Debo thing was just a blip on the radar. I'm not even going to put any stock into Debo randomly showing up last week. Jauan Jennings is the number 1 receiver in this offense. This team is going to have to pass the ball a lot to keep up with Detroit. and it's a good matchup for Jennings. So as hard as it might be to trust anybody in San Francisco these days, I'm going to go for the upside of Jennings. And for those of you still streaming for the win this week, let's talk quarterback and tight end, starting with a QB that should be available on waivers.
You talked about that game a couple weeks ago, 49ers Rams, and Matthew Stafford was not very good in that game, and then he was very not good again last week. But I think this is a good bounce back spot for Matthew Stafford this week. They're back at home. They're facing this Arizona Cardinals defense. Now, when they played each other earlier in the year, Stafford did not have a very good game. But remember, in that game, Puka Nacua was out, and Cooper Kupp left early with an injury, so he didn't really have anybody to throw to. At home, with Puka fully healthy, Kupp is healthy. I don't know if that matters, but he's at least healthy and out there. I think Stafford is going to bounce back in a big way this week. Now, I'm going to be honest, he's not my favorite quarterback this week. There are definitely quarterbacks I like better than Stafford, and if you got one of those guys, don't play Stafford. But if you do play the streaming game, and maybe the streaming quarterback you had isn't cutting it for you or has a tough matchup, go take a look at Matthew Stafford at home against the Cardinals. I think this is a good bounce back spot for him. I think he does bounce back and comes through with a nice game.
Well, as far as tight end goes, I feel like we're going to talk about Chig Okonkwo way too much this week. But here we go. We just can't ignore a guy who's getting so many targets. I know Brenton Strange wound up being a big fail last week, but you couldn't foresee the fact that he would fumble and then get punished for the fumble. That's just one of those things that happens. But Chig Okonkwo is getting targets. It's a great matchup again. I'm going to trust in it. And he's definitely going to be available almost everywhere on waivers because nobody has any reason to start Chig Okonkwo up until this point in the season. But now we do because Mason Rudolph back at quarterback. It's like he's just lasered in on Okonkwo as much as possible. 21 targets over the last 2 games. That's insane for anybody, much less a guy who was an afterthought in fantasy. And look, I do understand that before this, even though the Jaguars, we already know the Jaguars are a great matchup for anybody at any position, basically, and that includes tight end. Yeah, they're bottom 10 in every statistical category against the tight end. But these teams just played a couple of weeks ago, and Okonkwo did almost nothing. 3 catches for 8 yards, which is pretty impressive that he even managed to get so few yards on 3 catches. But that was with Will Levis, and this is a different offense with Rudolph. He's airing it out for better or for worse, and he's focused on Okonkwo. We have to chase target share. We have to look at the matchup, and we have to go with a guy who now does have upside. I'm not sure if he'll score a touchdown because that's something he hasn't been doing, but if you're in a PPR league, yeah, Okonkwo is going to be a guy that you want to plug into your lineup if you're looking for upside. Make sure you got all the right decisions made for your lineup this week, and check out all of our start sit videos for week 17 and more.